Whether it's Solon, who at the end of his life kind of just retired into seclusion, and he was, if not hated, disliked by everyone because his laws required him to actually hold everybody to account.
But the art, like, that's part of the problem. It's like the art of the last 5-10 years is like a lot of it has been dominated by moralism, by moralizing. Similarly with the great classical plays, it's, you're right that you're you're probably not going to feel tempted to kill your father and marry your mother anytime soon after seeing Oedipus the King. But that's not really the greater effect of the play as a whole.
Part of the problem is that there's like a semantic slipperiness about the word moral. And when you say moral, bells go off in people's heads saying, "Oh, you have a lesson to impart. That's what this is about." When really it's not that. It's not the idea that art is medicine that you're wrapping sugar around and then you're delivering it to someone. It's that it's more like good food. It nourishes you.
Welcome everybody to a new Fireside chat. We are now officially consolidated here over at Age of Muses. So this is our first Fireside chat dedicated to addressing the questions and the crisis, we could say, of culture and art today. Franklin Roosevelt, 1932, started Fireside chats to talk about the banking crisis, right? People were kind of freaking out. They didn't know what was going to happen. And the purpose of these chats, of the Firesides, was to basically explain to people, talk about banking a bit, get them to understand what's going on, and basically present a vision, right? Give people a sense of vision. He famously said, I believe it was in his inauguration, he quoted Proverbs, where there is no vision, the people perish. And it's clear that, today there is a lack of vision. So I have two very interesting guests here, fellow podcasters, fellow Substackers. I have Elijah Blumov, Perseus Blumov, and Mathew Buckley Smith. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, so you guys are both involved in the literary milieu, right? You guys both have your own poetry, literary podcasts. You guys are critics, writers. And so I thought it'd be interesting, fun to have you guys on, and where we can just chat a bit about how people are responding, how things are going in terms of the current cultural paradigm that you guys are interacting with. And maybe by the end of this conversation, we'll be able to get a bit of perspective and zoom out, because there is a lot of doom and gloom, right? A lot of people, I was listening to Tim Dillon recently on his podcast, and he was saying how culture's dead, art is dead. And really, the only thing that's left is the kind of, in terms of good art, is when it's dark. It can be very complex. I'm sure we've all watched some of the Netflix sci-fi series. I mean, there's some interesting stuff out there, but it's usually it's pretty dark. So on that note, I guess it's not surprising if people may have a certain lack of hope or optimism today. But I will read this poem for people, and then you guys come in as you want. So on that note, we do have Petrarch's sonnet number 7, where he addresses everyone, period, all ages. I was going to say, in this room, I'm by myself. So let's see what people think. Indulgence, sloth, and cushioned luxuries have driven virtue into banishment, where nature, vanquished by our temperament, seems dazed and lost between the boundaries, and heaven's gentle light, which oversees all human life, has now become so spent that those who want the stream's replenishment in Helicon are seen as oddities. Who longs for laurel or the myrtle tree? Philosophy, you travel nude and poor, proclaims the mob, intent on money-making. The other way provides less company. So much so, gentle soul, I beg you, please, do not abandon your grand undertaking. So
You said that was translated by A.M. Juster, right? Who is
translated
just
by A.M. Yester.
yeah, he's very technically skilled. I butted heads with him, but he is very good at what he does.
Yeah, so that's an address from Petrarch, renowned humanist, Renaissance humanist. I mean, people today have a lot are yearning for a golden age. You know, we hear some people saying, "I mean, new American golden age." I don't know, maybe, but yeah, people get really hung up on this question. So yeah, I thought it'd be interesting to get your guys' takes. Are we in a golden age? Are we headed into a golden age? Are all the golden ages in the past and now it's just shitty culture? Where are we?
Well, based on we were talking a little bit earlier, I think it's important to make two or three big distinctions to start off. One is that by golden age, the golden age that we are seeking and that we're brainstorming about is not some idea of utopia. It's not some idea of universal prosperity. It's really just the idea of a time and place where an abundance of good artists spring up and where they are able to flourish. Uh, they're able to egg each other on and challenge one another and create a body of work that is lasting. When we refer to the Spanish Golden Age or the Italian Golden Age of painting and for Spain of literature, or if we talk about Elizabethan England or the 5th century Athens, we're talking about periods of excitement and fertility, which were often politically very unstable. There was often a lot of crime and corruption and despair even, but people were making good work. And I think what we're interested in, or at least what I'm interested in, is trying to find the patterns in these different golden ages. You know, what was happening, what was in the environment, what was in the air that enabled, despite, you know, maybe a lot of oppression, a lot of Philistinism in the societies, what enabled all of these artists to grow and to blossom and to build something really worthwhile. So that's the question that I want to address today. And I think the other major thing that we should consider, maybe a way of framing this, is, you know, what has always been the case across the ages in terms of what the artist has to contend with, the obstacles they have to face, and what is unique to our time.
No, that's great. That's a perfect that helps to just situate things, right? I mean, when people think golden ages, I mean, there's this idea that everything is just good. But then if you go back to any golden age, right, and you read the greatest minds, whether it's Petrarch, like we just read there, whether it's Solon, who at the end of his life kind of just retired into seclusion, and he was, if not hated, disliked by everyone because his laws required him to actually hold everybody to account. And he wasn't there to just give handouts to all the lower classes, right? He believed there had to be justice for both the rich and the poor. And the rich didn't like him because he actually imposed fair taxes. And, you know, he reformed the financial system, which was a big part of it. And that often, I mean, that's always a source of anxiety for people, right? When you're like, wait, is our whole economy a bubble that's just about to collapse? That's not good. We can understand if people aren't reassured when they're looking at that. But just to say, you could go back to Seneca. I mean, Seneca's tragedies, as I've discovered, thanks to Dana Gioia, who's been doing some great translations of Seneca's tragedies that have not been really read or studied in any serious way for like 500, 600, almost 1,000 years. Seneca was a tragedian, but today he's mostly known as a Stoic philosopher, rhetorician, statesman. But his tragedies are very dark, right? He was living in a very dark time in terms of the decadence and corruption in Rome. I mean, Nero. I mean, that's pretty. That's like the icon of decadence and destruction. And
I mean, his own death was a product of this time. I mean, this excess, right?
Yeah. So
right, Seneca and Lucan were both forced to commit suicide by Nero. And I mean, it's proof that you can have an incredibly wise and grounded and talented genius like Seneca advising you for your whole life. And if you're a psychopathic idiot, it's not going to make a difference.
You still turn out to be a dirtbag. Yep.
Right?
So yeah,
Indeed.
nothing new under the
Yeah.
sun, right? In that sense.
Yeah, and I think maybe one way of grounding us, and two, this might sound pessimistic, but I think it actually could be optimistic because if you think about some great figures from history, um, it's not that they were living in a time of wine and roses and everything was great. Like we have Socrates and Boethius were both executed. Dante and Michelangelo were both exiled from Florence. Giordano Bruno was executed. Galileo was excommunicated, right? Milton was shut away and almost executed by the Restoration. Like you could go on and on.
They
Like,
almost tried to burn Kepler, accusing him of witchcraft as well, or protecting his mom, who they accuse of. Yeah, more of the same.
right. So hatefulness towards great artistic figures is not new, or even indifference and hostility are not new to artistic figures throughout the ages, no matter how golden the age was.
Yeah. I mean, something that came to mind just thinking about this in the lead up to our conversation was that there's one arena I'm somewhat familiar with where we are definitely living in the golden age, and that is chess. That there's chess is being played. I mean, seriously, like chess is better now than it has ever been. The best chess player who's ever lived is alive right now and is still, he may be just slightly past his peak. And like thinking about there are three reasons that come to mind for that. One is that there are more people who are playing, right? There are more people, period, and more of them are playing. And so the very, very rare mind that is a great chess player is more likely to actually happen upon the game. Two is that there's communications technology that allows people to play all the time. It used to be hard to find somebody to play with. Now I can play 20 games tonight, right, with people all over the world. And then three is that chess engines have, like computers have not just linked people together, but revealed new possibilities in the game, which is something I don't see AI writing doing. I don't see ChatGPT revealing new possibilities in writing. Maybe it will at some point. I've not seen that yet. But I do think that part of what also allows for that flourishing, to pick up on what Elijah said earlier, is that there is such a thing as a selection, right? There's large numbers of people participating. There's variety and there's experimentation. There's competition, but there's also selection, right? There's such a thing as losing a game. There's such a thing as being winning out and being distinguished. And I think that is something that we haven't figured out in our age with regard to art. I think what we figured out is the market answer, right? People make money or they don't. They get grants or they don't. But we haven't figured out. You suggested in previous ages there were aristocrats who were selfish and tasteful enough to pay for the stuff they thought was good. And so you actually had somebody making a decision based on quality and selecting in that way. We don't have a scythe that works that way today.
Right. Yeah. And we were talking about this off mic. I think the two things that make us the most unique in our time, ways that we are now that we were not in previous ages, are the two things that are most holding us back from having a golden age today. And that is that there is no premium put on beauty in the general culture, and two, that there's no criterion by which we measure the quality of art, at least that's generally accepted. And these things are related, I think. But when you don't have a premium put on beauty, then you're automatically going to alienate the majority of the population, because I think beauty is a universal human need. And as soon as art stops caring about beauty, or architecture stops caring about beauty, people are not invested anymore. Then it becomes a bubble of people who are particularly enthusiastic about a certain discipline, but who are not in touch with popular needs. And then on top of that, you have we live in this culture of relativism where no one is willing to say that something is really actually better than something else. And because of that, there can be no competition. And I think competition is actually one of the necessary factors in a golden age. I think, and in a couple of senses. One is that I think artists need to compete against each other. I think the reason that you see a whole crop of artists that are really good arise in, say, one city is because you have, maybe one or two who are really good. And then people start flocking to learn from those people, or they see them and they're inspired by them, and then they start working harder. And then you have these artists who are all making each other better because they're all competing. They're all trying to be better than one another. But if we live in a culture in which we can't say that anyone's better than anyone else for, fear of hurting someone's feelings, or for this, pseudo enlightened belief that everything is relative, then that competition can't exist. Right. And then it's true that we do have poetry competitions, we do have prizes and things like that, but no one really there's no real prestige attached to them other than maybe the necessary capital that you need to get a job at a university or something like that. Right. I don't know any poets who look at another poet's resume and see how many awards they have and they're like, wow, that must be a good poet. Like, it's fake money. Like, no one actually puts stock in that. We don't live in a world or in a society where poets can really be judged against each other and have people agree on what to look for, have people agree on what makes for quality. And I think that, and we're never all going to completely agree on, what is the best work of art, but having a vocabulary, having a grammar that we can use to debate about this stuff, and where we all sort of are on the same page of what we're talking about, and we can argue pro and con for this artist or that artist, is really valuable. And that's something that I think we just almost totally lack in general literary society today.
And that kind of competition and that pursuit of an ideal, or that pursuit of a bestness, is also what allows for actual innovation. You look at like great experimental artists, great moments in which artists come at find a new way to approach an image, or find a new way to approach writing. It's not because it's not because there's no structure and everything's just sort of floating around in a big amoebic miasma, right? It's because there's pressure, and there's a lot of attention in one place and a lot of care. And so an innovation or a new way of approaching the problem might actually be something real, rather than just being a sort of a novel curlicue, right? It's not just something new. It's something. It's a new solution. It's a new way of achieving an effect.
Right. Or as the cliche goes, you need pressure to create diamonds. And I feel like, there are some diamonds being created some places. We just often don't see them. But for the most part, we're living in a coal mine that's on fire, and we just see smoke everywhere. And it's hard to see what actually is going on. And it's hard to see beyond the mediocrity what's really valuable.
What about human beauty? Because I think you're right about the devaluing of beauty in a lot of respects, but it does also seem like human beauty maybe matters more than it ever has.
You mean cosmetic, like cosmesis?
Well, some of it is phony baloney. Some of it you could say like is weird or is not true, but like there is also just looks matter more than they ever have, right?
Yeah, I think that has something to do with sort of our attention deficit culture. First impressions and superficiality are more important. Like if you see a beautiful woman on Instagram, you're more likely to linger, regardless of whether she's saying anything interesting, than if, she's plain looking and saying the same thing or doing the same thing. I think that's part of it. Also, I think that's one of the last places of not consensus, but there is no real arguing with attraction.
Right.
There, we might be attracted to different looks or different aesthetics, but there is enough commonality that we can almost all agree when we, regardless of whether someone looks like someone else, we can say, oh, this woman is beautiful, that man is beautiful. Yeah. And even if that person is not to our tastes, we can acknowledge, oh, yeah, I can see how they're handsome or how they're beautiful. Like even if
there's enough agreement, it's meaningful to say in something other than merely the "this is my cup of tea" sense.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, what I think the really screwed up thing is that I think that this also applies to how we look at art. It's just that it's not acknowledged. by the people who are making art or who are in the universities now or who are, I guess, trying to drive the culture.
I
I
would,
think that the greatest indication of this is tourism. There are spots in the world where people just flock. They spend thousands of dollars that they may have, tried to accumulate for years to go to specific places just because they're beautiful, just because they're scenic. And there's wide acknowledgement that, Angkor Wat is a really wondrous place. The Alps are a really wondrous place. Paris is a beautiful place. Like we can all agree on that. And this is why it boggles me that, architects don't pay attention to this. Like there's natural beauty, of course, but then we know what makes for a beautiful building. And it's not that it has to look like a Greek temple. It's not like it has to look like a Gothic cathedral. It can look new, but there are qualities of beauty in buildings that have been completely stripped away.
Just for my dad's sake, I'll say I don't know that it's always architects making it. It's sort of like saying like, why are books so shittily made now? Don't book designers care? Like the book designers would love to make every book look like Brad Lighthouser's books, but yeah, like the architects often care about beauty a great deal, but that they may not be the ones making those decisions.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair enough. But yeah, I mean, the system we have doesn't care about beauty, despite the fact that it is evident that the mass groups of people who are relatively uneducated do care about beauty. And you don't have to get a college degree and you don't have to study Foucault to know when you're looking at something beautiful.
well, I think this is where, and I mean, I'm also keying off of when I speak, just conversations that I've had and, input from other people is also being channeled here. Uh, but to set that up, I mean, we were talking before we started to record about the Brave New World question, right? Where I shared a quote from Huxley's Brave New World. Everybody knows the novel. I mean, we had a short-lived show, Escaping the Brave New World, back in the day here, and so we did talk about that. But I think Huxley had a clinical insight into the effects of beauty, the effects of high art, as he calls it, right? So we're not talking pop culture. We're not talking entertainment, just entertainment culture, right? Not distraction, but really high art. If you think Aeschylus, if you think classical Greek tragedy, if you think Dante's comedy, what does that mean? Maybe we can explore that throughout this conversation. But just to say that the choice that the savage was given or that he was told society had was between happiness.
And just to clarify, the savage is the name of a character in the play or in the book. This is not a larger abstraction.
Thank you for that, Matthew. This is where, it's important people correct me or just qualify my statements. I should always have somebody around me to qualify my statements. But basically, the idea being the choice was between happiness or high art. And John the Savage, he's called John the Savage because he was isolated from this utopian Brave New World perfect system of control where people have soma, they have the feelies, they have all that central beauty that we were just talking about a moment ago, right? The kind of Freudian, mass psychology, how do we sell more Pepsi? But sure, that's always a thing. That's easy. And those kind of psychological or spiritual insights, if you will be used by people running a society. But the question of true beauty, transcendent beauty, high art, whatever we want to call it, I don't know what to call it without insulting somebody at a certain point, especially today.
Oh, this is part of the problem, right? Is that we have this walking on eggshells culture.
Yeah, so I'm very bad at walking on eggshells, as you guys can see. But Huxley's point, though, is that you can't really allow it. If so, the question that I often encounter from people, or you hear people thinking out loud, has our culture been deliberately sabotaged, right? Has there been a deliberate attack on this question of beauty? I've spoken to editors who were in very high positions who were very demoralized. I mean, one of them actually went crazy. I don't know what happened to him, actually. But he had seen, he was in Germany and he saw, he had an inside view of how the culture market, if you want to, the culture system worked, where the grants were coming from, who was deciding right? We always talk about grants and stuff, but if you look at, well, who's actually deciding who gets the Mellon fellowships, who gets the, New Yorker big prize, or whatever, the Paris Review, 50 gazillion dollars for, writing a poem about a chick that's bleeding for like 20 years. Who knows, right? There's weird poems out there. So who's deciding that? If you ask most people, if you ask most critics, they don't really know. Or maybe they know the person. They're like, oh yeah, but there seems to be a system. So that kind of lends itself, in my experience, to people surmising or, leaning into kind of conspiracy ideas that, well, it seems like our culture has been sabotaged intentionally because of these kind of brave new world designs. Like you can't really allow the kind of beauty we're talking about if you want to have a sedated population that doesn't have access to its higher faculties actively. They can look to the past, they can go to Paris, they can go visit the Eiffel Tower, but the aesthetic official narrative is that that's from the past, right? You can like classical Greek sculpture, but that's in the past, right? We're like, that's beauty has moved on. Beauty has changed.
Well, it's more like we've moved on from beauty.
Wait. So, but just so to clarify, because I do think like often the people making decisions about who gets grants or who gets prizes are themselves either critics or they're participants in whatever art form, even if they're making bad decisions. They may be poets making bad decisions about a poet who wins a thing, or they're, in some cases, they're bureaucrats or they're, but it seems like very implausible to me that there's a top-down, deliberate, malevolent conspiracy to obliterate beauty. That just seems like,
I don't think so either.
What do you guys say to that? Like, what's your, like, how do you explain, right? Because we were talking 2 minutes ago that, okay, there's a lack of competition, but do we really want to just say that because of a lack of competition, nobody is striving for beauty, even though it's clear that everybody.
No. I think lots of people are striving for beauty. I just think that you have a pileup of incentives that drive people to make individual choices that add up to, some better and worse situations depending on what question you're looking at. I just think that the like malevolence, organization, and duration, pick two and they can go together for a while. But all three, it's just like, it doesn't stick very well. So I'm very. I had to laugh because you quoted in a podcast you were on. I think it was the same guy, Dylan, saying that the only people who don't believe in conspiracy theories are bad liars. And it got me out loud because like, I'm a terrible liar and I don't believe in conspiracy theories. But like, maybe that's why I'm so bad at lying and I don't like lying. But yeah, I just find it hard. Yeah, I do think there are a lot of problems with their culture. I don't think that they're malevolently imposed.
No, I think that's just it's a psychological reaction. We want to be able to have a scapegoat. And it would be very convenient and simple if we were able to do that. We look at any organization that tries to accomplish anything. Like they're so inefficient, right? Like there's no way there could be any single organization that's driving things so efficiently that they're getting everything that they want. I do not believe in a cabal that is trying to bring down beauty. I think there are two things. I think one, that there are people in very high positions of power, executives at companies who only care about the bottom line. And so they're willing to sacrifice everything to that end. Beauty is not profitable, so it's not part of their considerations.
Wait, is that true though? Hang on, but is that true? And
is what true?
To go down the whole, I thought anti-beauty cabal. That's kind of funny. But you said beauty is not marketable, but is that true? Because I mean, for our audience, if I
no, I think like I said before, I think that we all have a drive, we all have a hunger for beauty, and so I think that in a way the public has been betrayed. But I think that as corporate thinking goes right now, beauty is not that important. Like it's important to be able to be eye-catching. It's important to maybe have a sexy model in a commercial. Maybe like they care about beauty to that extent. But caring about beauty in the sense of high art certainly is not a priority. Or, making a building beautiful is not a high priority. So there's that. And then there's also the fact that throughout history, and especially throughout the past 100+ years, there have been certain figures who have created a kind of domino effect, and I think a lot of them started with good intentions. But
Mm,
like, the classic example would be, people like T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound,
mm,
who, were genuinely trying to inject vitality into a poetic culture that they thought was stagnant. They were trying to do something really new and interesting and vibrant, but they introduced, a whole can of worms, which ended up, I think, devolving and devolving into, uh, everything is permitted, and what we have now, and also a certain current of doom mongering that has only gotten worse over time.
I mean, here's an alternative explanation that I think lines up with what you're saying, Elijah. That rather than supposing that there is a deliberate attempt to exterminate beauty or to stifle beauty, I am not. I'm not a monarchist. I don't think we should live under one strong, even if he's a wise ruler. I resist that idea, but I do kind of like I wonder if a, a, an age and a culture that values beauty, if that value might not need to be imposed from above. And in the absence of that pressure, you're not going to get beauty. Like, I don't know that democracy and capitalism, which are great for a lot of things, I'm not sure they're great for cultivating a society that greatly values beauty.
Right. Well, relativism is sort of it's the apotheosis of democratic thinking, right? Like, you have your opinion, I have my opinion. They're both equal. We each have equal, right to say what is beautiful and what is not. And I agree that tends to actually lower the bar rather than raise it. So that is true.
Well, it raises other bars. It's like cars got a lot uglier as they got a lot safer, among other things.
I mean, I think here Plato is actually a pretty good standard, right? Because he was very critical of the demos, right? When I think it helps because, I mean, democracy today doesn't necessarily have the same connotations as it has in previous ages, right? So like democracy comes from the word demos, which is the mob or the rabble, right? So if people are just getting together and like, should we burn the witch? Raise your hands, right? And you're running your society like that, that's a problem, right? And so Plato was saying, I mean, in terms of democracy, obviously you don't want an oligarchy and you don't want an absolute monarchy. He's comparing and contrasting the different systems in the Republic, but ultimately his conclusion, and people may agree or disagree, is that unless people love wisdom, right, it doesn't really matter what system you have. Any system can be corrupted and aesthetics plays a big part in that. Plato dedicated several books to the question of the role of the poets. Why? Because the poets were the chief image makers of society. And I think it's almost more useful to look at that conversation today because our society has changed, right? Like poetry is not the same kind of institution that it was 2000 years ago in terms of image making. We have cinema, right? We have Hollywood, even though that's kind of dying now and big tech's kind of taking it over with this.
Even like banning TikTok, that whole debate. One way, which I don't give a shit about TikTok, but like that debate is more similar to Plato's sets of concerns about what is influencing the culture.
Yeah, and so the images, he was just making the point though that if the images that the poets are making, like these images themselves can be compelling, but are they going to lead people to beauty, truth, and goodness, and ideally not one without the other, right? Because you can have beauty, but that doesn't mean you have goodness or truth. In the sense you could have whatever, Sydney Sweeney, she's got nice jeans. Okay, but I mean, I don't know what her soul looks like, or that's a very superficial example, but in terms of wisdom, you don't. So Plato is basically saying, how do we have a society where the images that are proliferated actually lead, right? They invite people, if you will. And I don't think he wanted to have the final answer. People kind of freak out and they say he's basically like, a Maoist that just wants to enforce this kind of totalitarian system. But he was very cheeky and playful. And he's saying, hey, if the poets come on up, if you want to defend your position and you want to tell me how poetry can help lead people to goodness, truth, and beauty, by all means. He's like, I love Homer. Like, please convince me. That was pretty much where he left the argument. But he just identified the paradox that images in and themselves are imitations, right? They're portraying something. They're not the direct thing. And the poets themselves are imitating imitators. The poet, which in that sense, the image maker could be a painter, he's painting a shoe. Okay. His shoes are made by cobblers. He can paint a shoe very realistically without actually knowing how a shoe is made. He's not a cobbler, right? But even a cobbler, I mean, his knowledge of shoes is still limited. So Plato's just saying that there's 2 degrees of separation. And so the images may or may not be reflective of reality, of what's actually true when it comes to wisdom, justice, goodness. So how do we, unless these images could be, or how do we fashion these images in a way that they lead to the real thing rather than mislead, right? I think that's the other question, because we have images today, right? Nobody's going to argue that we don't have all sorts of images or music videos or songs and lyrics that do the same thing the ancient poets were doing, but it's just the quality and the content, right, has changed. So that's the paradox, that we're talking about how do you intervene on that, right? Knowing that at the end of the day, the image making is central in shaping where a society is going to go.
Yeah, I think there's two solutions. I mean, we were talking before about how, in the Huxley dichotomy, it's like, oh, you can have stable happiness or you can have high art, and you can't have both at the same time. Well, it's like, well, we don't have either right now. People are not happy, and we don't have high art being celebrated in our culture. There's another worst of both worlds situation going on where we don't have high art uh being celebrated by aristocrats because we don't have aristocrats anymore, but we also don't have an equal society, right? Like we live, in a society where class, there's like huge class separation and just astronomical, monstrous amounts of exploitation. And we're about to have our first trillionaire, right? Like we have people, we have billionaires and millionaires who are in effect aristocrats, and that includes their ability to get their way in the government, but they don't have taste, right? And they don't care about developing a taste. There's no competition between, amongst them to determine who has the best artist under their wing,
Yeah.
or, who's building the most beautiful palace. Like that doesn't exist anymore.
To be clear, I think Plato would qualify that these are not aristocrats; these are plutocrats.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. They're not
Well,
the
yeah,
best.
I'm saying, yeah, they're not aristocrats. They're Philisteinocrats, but yeah. So I think that there's two possible. I won't go so far as to say solutions, but there's two strategies maybe that we could go for. One is the soul selects her own society tack, which is where sort of in Epicurean fashion, like-minded individuals gather together to create their own sort of mini societies, their own enclaves where they can make the art they want to make and celebrate it amongst one another. And the internet actually has made this possible, where we're not going to reach the billions of people in the world, but we might reach thousands of people who actually care about this stuff, and then we can find each other, all across the world now. So that's one way, is you can sort of say, okay, well, we're going to be like monks after the fall of the Roman Empire. We're gonna keep this stuff going even if no one else cares about it, and we're going to care about it, and we're going to pass it amongst one another, and we're going to keep the techniques alive. We're going to keep the tradition alive. Or you can say, and I think I've been trying to do sort of some of both. You can say, well, actually, there is an innate hunger that people have for beauty, for clarity, for intelligence and insight in what they consume. And it's not always the easy way. And so they're not exposed to it, or maybe they're not of their own volition going to seek it out. But if we have people, in a culture who can convince others that, hey, there's an alternative way to living, then those people can gain an audience, then that can be really impactful, especially if we gain an audience with the right people, right? Like if you are someone who is able to get the ear of one of these millionaires or billionaires, maybe there could be some kind of patronage situation. Like I haven't seen that personally, but I think it's possible. I've argued for this on my show before that we should at least try to do this. We should try to seek this out, right? Because then this is the strategy of maybe like reforming the plutocrats into something resembling tasteful aristocrats, where we try to egg on those who have more wealth than us, those who have more power than us, to shift culture in ways that we want them to. Partly by convincing them, hey, this beauty thing actually is profitable. It actually is useful because people do desire it. People do go on vacation to see beautiful places. Maybe if we, put people in certain situations, they would see the value of good art in other ways.
There is an example of that actually, Elijah. I don't know if you guys have seen the new city of Cayala in Guatemala, which is a classical city that was recently built over the last years, that was funded by an unnamed Guatemalan, super aristocratic or oligarchical, good oligarchs, maybe you'll say, good Guatemalan oligarchs. How about that?
Yeah.
See that one?
So, but it's classical in the sense like architecturally, it looks like a Renaissance.
Renaissance city.
Okay.
Like classical architects who study at the Indiana University of Architecture. I believe it was Indiana. I may be wrong, but if anyone looks up the city of Cayala, it's a Renaissance city, and they adapted motifs from the local regions as well in terms of like the corn and the Mayan sort of heritage and whatnot in the capitals, and it's truly beautiful. It's like a truly timeless looking city with a truly classical aesthetic. But just to say, yeah, the architects recruited some well-to-do family, and they're like, hey, look, we can do something nice. Don't you want to do something nice? And that doesn't seem like a crazy pitch these days. Also, to your first point, Elijah, I mean, there are a lot of resources, right? I always feel like I'm arguing with people here, but like we have a lot of resources at our disposal. But back to that proverb, where there is no vision, the people perish. There is a dearth of vision. And I think a lot of the creative and talented people that, we kind of run into, there still really is a silo culture. Everybody kind of has their own little fiefdom. And to a certain degree, that's good. But when we look at the magnitude of the cultural crisis, right, or the crisis in beauty, whatever we want to call it, it does seem like at a certain point, people do have to get organized, right? And that's
your example of Guatemala is a great example of the synchrony between these two ways, right? Because you have this sort of fiefdom in Indiana where someone, some one or two or three people have decided, hey, we're going to make this an enclave for the study of classical art. Right. And that's like, that was around when there was someone in power to say, hey, I want a classical city. Oh, there's these people in, who knows where, Indiana, who are doing this stuff. And we can draw upon them to help make this city. And, it's the same, like, when the Irish monks were, preserving Latin and Greek classics, they didn't necessarily they weren't changing the world at that moment, but it's certainly a good thing that they were doing that preservation, because later, when there was an opportunity, people were able to draw on those texts and have people who were literate to help, reform the rest of society. So I think, now that I'm thinking about it, it's not an either or. I think both streams need to be pursued at once.
Because, for me, I end up having like a belling the cat problem where, I have a sense of what high art sort of is. And I like a lot of art, I guess I think of as high art. And I care about poetry and other writing. And I try to do the best work I can. And I'd love some patron or two. But I don't feel at all confident about I don't think I could imagine there being some better program imposed to cultivate art. I don't think I could design it. I don't think like I know what people in power should be doing. I feel like we do have some Horaces and some Virgils, and we've got some Augustuses, but what we're lacking is the Maecenas to connect them, right? We need like somebody who has taste and has connections, but is not himself necessarily an artist or is not much of one, to sort of to facilitate this patronage, or to facilitate this kind of to connect these different resources in a meaningful way.
I mean, at the same time, because I don't want to, or for people listening to this, it's like, yeah, nobody's saying here. I mean, I don't feel like the move is, hey, got to find some rich guy, who's got good taste, or but that's probably not a bad idea.
Yeah, yeah. The Christmas Carol solution to poverty, right?
Like, I it's people. There's a morale problem. I think this is where like people's individual morale and their sense of connection. I think before we started recording, right, you talked about this notion of the dignity of man, right, Elijah, and depending on what people's, I don't want to say some kind of like flaky hippie thing about hope in humanity or belief in humanity, but if people have a dark image of man, right, they can be very intelligent, right, they can be very talented, but if spiritually, if you will, we'll wax spiritual here a little bit, if you're not in the kind of disposition where you will take the kind of Promethean action or risks, then yeah, you can be a really smart person, maybe you'll do really well for yourself, but it won't necessarily have a transformative effect. So it does feel like there needs to be an infusion of optimism, right? I feel like we touch on
well,
without optimism, everything we're talking about, people will agree, but they won't do anything.
But everything is connected, right? Like if there were some billionaire who did fund some really cool project, that would inspire a lot of people. People would look at it and say, oh, wow, I didn't know that people were doing that anymore. And then they would say, oh, this is actually a workable thing that I could attempt. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's, and we are all podcasters, right? Like we have all created platforms for ourselves where we can, say what we think is important and try to, either convince people of certain things or challenge people on certain things. Mm-hmm. And that's another way that we try to affect the culture. I mean, none of us have started out our lives with, exquisite silver spoons in our mouths where we, are in control of all sorts of people and have all these connections. Like, there's only so much that we can do.
And look where we are now.
Right. It started from the bottom. Now we're here.
I was going to say, David, did Elijah tell you I was an optimist? Because you may have been sold a bill of goods.
No. But
that is talking from his secret.
From my podcasting dungeon.
Yeah.
Right. No, but the point being that we, there's only so much we can do, right? But all of us are doing what we can. We are creating these platforms. We're trying to get our voice out to as many people as we can. And that's one way of doing it. And I think it's a justified and noble way of doing it. How much success we have is kind of out of our hands, to a certain point. But in terms of trying to light a fire under people's asses, like I have committed myself to doing that. That's what I tried to do in the Iron Lyre. That's what I tried to do in the Monumentalist Manifesto. That's what I tried to do in my recent class and lecture on the grand style, is to try to get people thinking about these, large scale, ambitious ways of thinking about art again. And so I talk about that on the podcast. I talk about it in the essays I write. I haven't encountered a patron yet, but if I were, to bump elbows with a billionaire, you could bet I would talk his ear off about this stuff, right? Like we have to take the opportunities that we have and seek out as many directions and possibilities and avenues that we can. And the internet allows us tremendous opportunity. But of course, at the same time, it's a double-edged sword because there's so many people who are shouting into the void and, trying to get attention, and it's white noise all around you. And how do you stand out? And that's another question. And, unfortunately, artists are unfairly called upon to be both artists and salesmen for themselves nowadays, right? Like, and there's only so much energy people have, so much mental morale that people have, and so we're doing the best we can. But yeah, I agree with you. I often see, and I'm very frustrated by people who are like, oh, I wish I could write a verse drama, or I wish I could write an epic, but no one's going to read it, or I don't think that people can do stuff like that anymore. And it's like, well, why not?
Yeah.
Right. And there's the question of demand, but like, as I've tried to argue in the past, like there could be a demand for it. Demand can be created. People can be convinced, right? This is the fundamental basis of advertising. People can be convinced that they need something.
And the irony is, I mean, yes, like poets are not great salespeople, but generally speaking, they're Dana Joya, shout out, great salesman. He did a great
Be-
job there at General Foods. But
better salesman than poet, I would say. I mean, I admire him a great deal. I've been critical of him, but like he's very smart, very perceptive. I think he's a better salesman than he is a poet. But
oh, okay, well, that's fine.
That's why we have Mathew here, is to say those
I was
things.
going to say I don't try to light a fire under people's asses. I just try to offer some good company along the way. That's all I got.
We like that. But I think no, but I think this gets to it, Elijah, right? Like this question of morale, I've insisted on this in different podcasts as well, and I think you've only kind of made it clear that that's everything else can be the same, right? Like people still have access to, we've all talked about, we run into talented people. There is some cool art, there is cool literature. There are cool I watched some crazy documentaries really that were fascinating about I mean these I don't want to go too into it, but some like art criticism journals that were Cephaly that was tied to these like occult French networks. It was very fascinating. It was tied into Balenciaga, but it went into like the artistic milieus that were connected to these very high level kind of corporate monsters, if you will. And like aesthetics plays a huge role in like aesthetic philosophy in shaping the culture, right? When it comes to imagery. And I've written a fair bit recently about like what goes into creating pop culture, right? If you look at the aesthetics of pop culture and the kind of pop culture increasingly popularizing kind of more Gnostic or whatever, we'll just say dark themes. Like this is very kind of deliberate, but it's also very sophisticated, I would say. Like if you look at some songs, they're not bad. Like I mean, Lady Gaga pop songs are they're quite interesting, especially when you look at the lyrics and you see what she's doing, or more specifically, what the people around her are doing, because these artists don't really work alone, right? There are, you could say, more talented artists or more serious artists, producers that do have a vision, right? They do know how to tell a story. And as one of them was saying, one of these producers that worked with Gaga, he says, my job is to hold up a mirror to the artist and show them that better self that they can't see themselves. Or you can't see it because you don't have that mirror. So I'm going to show you what that is. And so they're able to direct them. They're able to give them hints, suggestions, and all that to say that they're able to shape images and like the role of these images and the, I don't want to say aestheticians, but what do you, artists who do this. I mean, they recognize the value of aesthetics, right? They recognize the role in shaping what people like. That's the other thing Fernando Garibay said. He says people don't know what they want. So part of the role of a song is to tell a story, get people to emote, and tell them what they want, right? Which is not different than a salesperson. So the irony is, I just to say that a lot of this more commercial stuff, I mean, they do know how to sell stuff, but they do understand aesthetics. They just have a different goal in mind, one could say. But it's
Right. Well,
I have to say, because I was sent by you, because I listened to a few of your things and you talked about Lady Gaga some, and I was sent, I don't believe in demons and I don't believe in demonic agendas, but because of some things you said, I was sent to, I was like, all right, I got to look up this Lady Gaga stuff. And I looked up her most recent video, and the thought I had was like, oh my God, if your one goal was to convince people you were not a Satanist, this was the worst job you could have done. It was like I don't think she's a Satanist, but like, holy shit, if you were like, if what you wanted was to alarm people at a maximal level that you were doing demonic stuff, there was like, she did a great job of convincing people that that's what was going on. So I have to give you credit, like, it seems demonic as all get out.
a lot of the like 1980s anti-Motley Crue moms to like really mojo back. Uh, no, just to say though, I think the good guys, but yeah, my final point was that the good guys need to understand these things, right? We're talking about like, yeah, artists, have they also kind of have to be salespeople. I don't know what that it's that, or that makes it sound dirty. But I like Poe's approach. And here I'm just thinking out loud, right? We're spitballing at this point. Welcome to the show, everybody. Poe talked about when he composed The Raven, and I know this will upset some people because some of my esteemed friends or contributors, they don't like Edgar Allan Poe, or they think, whatever, he's just like a
The
hyped
Jingle
up
Man.
cool guy. Yeah. But he wanted to write something that would appeal both to the popular and critical taste. I think that's very useful because one of the other problems with modernism and all that is that there was this idea of the mass and mass culture, and like we are aesthetes. We do high art, not in the way that I usually use the term, but it's for like it's almost got a Gnostic quality to it. It's for an elect group or initiates, people that like really understand, but in a way that it's almost like other people can't. And so you create this gulf where, yeah, I mean, the example I use is poems around a campfire. If you go to some place and you meet a bunch of different people and you're all gathered around a campfire and you just want to read some meaningful poems that like a good poem will enchant people. They don't have to be literati. They don't have to be aesthetes. If you can read a good poem around a campfire, you can awaken those higher faculties. We can call it that, the sublime that everybody kind of has access to. And the role of great art is to kind of awaken it in people. You can do that if you pick the right poem. I mean, I don't know that I'd open with The Wasteland, right? I don't know that I would open with Ezra Pound's cantos and start trying to recite hieroglyphics that I can't pronounce, right? So Pose, I think it's important. The artists do have a responsibility, right? I think sometimes it gets a bit, I don't want to say elitist. I'm not that guy, but there's this idea of like poetry and literature has become a bit more closed and it's forgotten its higher goal and mission. I mean, Keats said, I have that on my wall actually. A poster from Rome, from the Keats Shelley Museum. Anybody who goes to Rome should go there. The great end of poesy, that it should be a friend to soothe the cares and lift the thoughts of man. Some people might not agree, but when Keats was writing, he had this sense that he thought poetry should lift the thoughts of man, right? It should awaken something higher or deeper in people. And how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I think that there's two extremes that both of which we want to avoid. One is the academic extreme that you're talking about, where it's very cloistered and people are just writing for other specialists. And I think that we do still see some of that, but I think that that's been on the wane just simply because English departments have been on the wane, humanities have been on the wane in general. But then there's the other side where you are actively, trying to speak to as many people as possible using very emotionally confrontational language. And that's how you get insta poetry and slam poetry. And I think that that's not the best trajectory for poetry either, because that's not challenging people or lifting people up to, see sophisticated, wise spiritual vistas. And I think, you were a little bit, you felt something was off when I was talking about salesmanship. But I think there's two ways that one can conduct salesmanship. I think you can stoop to conquer, right? Which is not what we want to do. And we can also hoist to conquer, right? Like we can try to challenge people we can try to bring people up. And, we're not going to do that through some sort of hermetic, pseudo sophisticated gibberish that only, in academies that only academics can understand. But yeah, so, I mean, you're right that there does have to be some sort of mass appeal, which is why I'm one reason I'm so interested in bringing back epic and drama, because these are public art forms. These, when Homer was writing for the demos and Shakespeare was writing for the demos and Sophocles was writing for the demos, and they didn't compromise their art by doing that. We want to create art which is, a grand spectacle that can attract the average person, but is also going to not just cater to whatever titillates them most easily, but actually challenges them and raises them up. I mean, famously, when the Divine Comedy came out, you had you had paisans in the fields like chanting Dante to one another. These are people who are not even literate, but they have Dante in their heads and they love it. And there are parts of it that speak to them, and they're not doing these in-depth exegesis of what the Divine Comedy means, but there's parts of it that touch them and that they can grasp and that are accessible to them. But Dante didn't have to stoop in order to get that audience.
So this is where I really feel like we run into belling the cat, right? Like, would I want poetry if it could definitely make people's lives better, improve the condition of their spirits, make them into happier and more whole human being? Like, it would be hard not to wish for that if that's something poetry could do. But when I sit down to write, I feel in no way qualified to elevate people. Like, I don't think I know how to make you a better person by writing a poem to you. I think it's one thing to say, like, I can teach people poems I think are good, or, memorizing the Divine Comedy sounds great, but I don't, like, when it comes down to actually trying to write the work, that's what I always wonder about. Like, do you two feel able to elevate people with your poetry?
I don't sit down to write a poem as if I'm writing a sermon. Like, I don't sit down.
Right,
like,
no,
okay,
but you're slightly shifting the question. I mean, like in the sincere, not in a sermonizing way, not in a moralizing way, but like in the way that you mean when you say you want poetry to elevate people.
Mhm.
Do you feel like you're equipped to do that?
I think I'm equipped to attempt it. When I think it comes along with naturally the kind of ambition that I have. I think I am drawn to large, what I would consider important topics that I want to write about. Topics of existential import that I think are important for myself and all other human beings to consider. And my poems, I think, are often an invitation to other people to consider these things in a new way, or in a deeper way, or maybe in a more wholesome way. And yeah, and I'm interested in writing dramas and epics, which also explore, the human condition writ large. And I think that if we have people trying for these things, trying to explore big visions of what humanity can be, what it is, and really trying to tackle some of, our largest spiritual problems head on, that's a good thing for poetry. It's not that yeah, I mean, I'm not saying you're saying this, but it's not as if we think we have all the answers and we're just handing them out, pell mell. It's that, we are willing to engage in a certain enterprise, which is to explore the human condition and try to articulate things about it, which can then deepen other people's experience.
I would just add, I think it's a useful question. It's good that you brought it up the way that you did, Matt, technically, because I do feel that poetry has some role. Like, instinctively, viscerally, I feel that poetry these things have a role in cultivating the emotions, the higher faculties. I mean, because sure, you could write a poem about that time you trauma bonded with your cat because you were alone on Valentine's Day or something. Maybe people will enjoy that. But I don't know that if I'm thinking poetry, like, no, that's not what it's for. So at a visceral level, I wouldn't be drawn to things that kind of want to bring what I consider loftier, noble art forms that are not meant for just consumption, right? Or entertainment or distraction. But then I also I've had a lot of pushback over the years, whether it's from editors or people who have contributors to the Chained Muse, which is now our Age of Muses, our new little mecca. But I would just, if you read Dante, if you read Keats, if you read Shakespeare, goodness is bold, virtue never fearful. It's from Measure for Measure. I mean, I always remember that one. It's true. And it's thrown in, right? It's almost like it's not a throwaway line, but you know what I mean? It's thrown in, it's peppered in with all sorts of other things happening. But there are these memorable lines. And I think you have that in films as well, right? Sometimes you have a whole film, or maybe you'll just remember one line from a film you saw like 20 years ago or something. That's a thing too. So, I mean, I think that the best art does that. It has a unique ability to do that in ways that other things can't. One of my poet friends, John, he always says poetry is not just wisdom, but memorable wisdom. So the verses, things are written in verses as opposed to just prose, and they're written as poetry because they are, in a sense, uh, mnemonics, right? There's something you want to remember. Right? Scripture is written in verses, and there are psalms that people memorize for a reason. They have something that is worth kind of keeping with you. And we used to have a culture of poetry, recitation, and memorization, not always done well, right? Every German I've ever met who was made to learn Schiller, I mean, these poor Germans, I don't know what, I mean, well, we know the whole post-war, it didn't, yeah, there were problems, right? So they didn't enjoy reciting Schiller anymore. Realization problem. So that's how I think about it. So instinctively, yeah, I feel like poetry is lofty. It's going to deal with nobler themes because otherwise I can just do other things. I can write an email. I can go to the gym, like I can have a Negroni. I like Negronis. I don't know that I need to write a poem about it, right? It's just
Right. But here's maybe a way to spin it is, you like Negronis, right? You might try to convince other people that Negronis are good. You might say, have you had a Negroni? That's some good stuff. You should check that out. We all have this drive to share things we think are good. And so like if I listen to a song and I'm like, man, that's a good song. I want to share that with this friend of mine who I think is really going to like it. I don't do that thinking, oh, well, I am wise and lofty and I'm going to bestow this wisdom upon my friend.
But you're
right?
the one saying that's what it should do. I'm not like that. The thing is like, I would say like, yeah, you share based on pleasure. You write with the goal of producing a sensation, but like you're the one saying it should be improving you.
Well, hold on a second. So I think that often what poems do, like when you write a poem or when I write a poem, I think this thought that I'm having is really interesting and really cool. And I want to share that with someone because just as it's enriched my life to a certain degree, I think it can enrich someone else's life to a certain degree. So yes, in a sense, I think, oh, this thing that I thought, this thing that I'm saying could be beneficial for you, but I don't do it from a place of I'm better than you or a place of condescension. It's more of a place of, oh, I just thought of the coolest thing yesterday. You might want to hear about it, but it'll be better if you hear about it in verse and with these special words that I've chosen because it's going to have a better impact on you that way.
That's so alien to how I write. Like that's like a wildly different exercise. Like I'm fascinated by it, but like that's so remote from what So I don't. Yeah.
I had an argument with one of our contributors. Is same thing. There's a different approach as well. I feel, but that's I technically we're, yeah. I don't think we're really stuck on that in the sense. Okay, there's a different perspective, but experience, like wisdom comes through experience. Now, do people want to call it wisdom? Do people want to call it experience? Or
pain comes from the darkness and we call it wisdom? It is pain.
There's many different ways to think about it. So I do think some people in terms of poetry or art, right, they're more focused on kind of, capturing their experience in a way that is dense, right, or concentrated, that concentrates a lot of things that have been experienced into just a few moments. And that can make really good art. I mean, technically, what's a great sculpture? It's condensing a whole story and capturing that in a single moment, right? That's kind of frozen in time. And if it's good, usually it has some motion, right? It kind of gets the imagination going. So I don't know that we're really disagreeing or think so differently so much as the approach is different.
What I'm trying to get across is that there is a universal human drive to share things. And I think that's fundamental to all poets. And poets might not think about, their work in exactly the same way in terms of how it's going to affect someone or, their ambitions for how many people it should affect or in what way, et cetera, whether it be moral or merely hedonic or what have you. But the drive, poetry is communication, and the drive to communicate something comes from thinking, oh, this person could benefit from this, whether the benefit is pure joy or whether it also involves something intellectual or moral. But that's I think at the root of it. And I think that wanting someone to have a moral experience or an intellectual experience on top of the joyful experience, because of course joy is at the root of it, that's just an extension of the drive that we all have as poets to share our work.
Yeah, yeah, it does feel. I don't know, because I love sharing. I was with Jonathan Farmer last night at the point. Like, there's nothing better than getting Jonathan to really laugh really hard at something. So I will tell him things that I know will make him laugh, and it's really gratifying. But I don't feel as if I have an improvement to offer him. I feel like I have something he can't yet enjoy, and then I get to watch him enjoy it.
Yeah, I just think that there's great. I think there's enjoyment to be gotten from insight, and it's just another it's
Yeah,
another
yeah,
way
yeah.
of it's another way of bringing benefit. I mean, benefit is the root of this, right? Like laughter is one benefit, or just a blissful feeling, or even a pulling a heartstrings feeling is a benefit. But then there are other benefits too that one can offer, sometimes inadvertently and sometimes purposely, which can often be of a philosophical dimension or
I
of
think
a spiritual dimension.
I think you're kind of hitting it on the head there, Elijah, in the sense that, I mean, Schiller talks about this. What do people take pleasure in? And I mean, this is the question that Plato's really looking at. Not only in the Republic, people get hung up on the Republic. If you fast forward to the Laws, which is later, I mean, he makes this kind of very clear. He talks about the education of children and like what are they going to take joy in, as their, what kind of music are they going to like and learn? Is it going to be music that's okay? The music should be performed well, but is what's being performed also actually good? Like what kind of songs are they, right? So there's always a content question as well as like a techne or craftsmanship question. But yeah, again, Schiller, I mean, he talks about art as actually it's the secret weapon to self-improvement. He's not a self-actualization guy, but he's saying like there are different ways to run a society, right? Like if you got laws, you got a state, and the state's got to survive. Like you got to have a government and laws. People also have to be kept in check, right? And so you have this tension between law and goodness or duty, right? Like you got to get people to follow law, you got to punish people. But if your society is just based on reward and punishment, if you raise children just based on reward and punishment, right? They get rewards if they do good things and they're punished. That doesn't necessarily make good people. Like good people like good things, right? They like beautiful things. Now, I think and I'm saying that way because
Wait, good people like beautiful things?
huh?
Good people like beautiful things?
Yeah, well, we could get to that later, but
Sure, okay.
that can get people upset, right? Like, what are you, a fascist? Are you like a Maoist kind of,
No, no, no.
they're going to throw in every epithet, or
Yeah.
at least,
Very, very unproductive conversations that take that turn. Yeah.
yeah. So, but all that to say, there are different ways to awaken one's faculties, but to take pleasure in it. I mean, Plato is saying, do people love wisdom? Not do they just do their duty because it's their duty and they're fucking miserable, right? They're Kantian sort of duty, and they're just curmudgeons. And that was his big thing, was his rejection of the Kantian system, that kind of the kind of German mentality of that time as well, that like there was just this cold idea of duty. But he said that if we really want to have a thriving culture and a culture that loves justice and beauty and goodness and aspires to these things, art is actually the secret weapon, because you can deliver pleasure and enjoyment while at the same time delivering other things. We can encounter wisdom. We can learn things that we're better off learning through art, right? Through watching a movie and not liking the way it ends, because it ends bad. And we don't want to be like that person in the movie. And so if we're ever in a similar situation or faced with similar life choices, we might remember that movie and that shitty ending that we don't want to live through. And this is Schiller's idea of theater as a moral institution. He was saying that ancient Greece, that's what they actually had And that's what the modern world, i.e., his world of that time, had kind of lost. Theater had sunk so low. The kind of German theater, he had a poem, it's a parody, Shakespeare's Shade, where it's about German theater of that time. And it's like it's a butcher getting, somebody going to the butcher and like buying, I'm going to say potatoes. They don't have potatoes at the butcher, but buying bacon or something, and then having a fight with his wife, and like that's the play, And he's like, what is anybody going to do with that? It's true to life. A lot of people could relate to that, but why do you need to make a play about that? Right. So there is a question of choice at one level of like, well, what kind of art do we want to have? What kind of art do we want to enjoy? But also there are effects, there are consequences. So we can distance ourselves regardless of what side we're on or our philosophies. And we can just observe, as Plato observed, that there are consequences to different kinds of art and culture. And it's interesting to look at that. But one of the things that we can observe is that, what people derive pleasure from, you can sort of analyze what the culture is and, what people really get a kick out of. Do they get a kick out of wisdom? Do they get a kick out of, seeing a great tragedy performed and leaving that thing kind of transformed? Or do they just get a kick out of, seeing the football getting kicked 20,000 times? And nothing wrong with that.
I was going to say, the Greeks liked that a lot too. It wasn't a football, but they were into it. Yeah.
Let's have the sports and the classical theater, right? What's wrong with, like, we have the sports. The only thing we're missing is classical theater, technically. So yeah, just to say that I think the moral thing, people have gotten so messed up with that when we think of art and aesthetics and like, is there a moral or philosophical kind of dimension that has to be looked at or considered or that's relevant? People were kind of almost traumatized in that, like, you're not allowed to even go there. Art is just supposed to be about what you feel.
Well, but I mean, but the art, like, that's part of the, it's like the art of the last 5-10 years is like a lot of it has been dominated by moralism, by moralizing.
Didacticism is no better. I guess we should.
Right. I mean, it's not like it isn't. It often it's sort of a progressive stripe. It's like often stuff I even agree with, but I think like, Jesus, this is a terrible movie.
So that's didacticism, though, right? Like, yeah. That's kind of telegraphing. Good art can't do that either.
I don't see. That's the other thing is I think like you're right that Shakespeare is just is a genius in so many different dimensions that he produces these indelible aphorisms, but the power of his play is hardly that they're aphorism delivery systems. And similarly with great classical plays, it's, you're right that you're probably not going to feel tempted to kill your father and marry your mother anytime soon after seeing Oedipus the King. But that's not really the greater effect of the play as a whole. And like with Shakespeare in particular, I mean, I think it's an effect that can't be summarized. I mean, I think, Aristotle comes close by talking about catharsis, but and Nietzsche comes close in a different way by saying that it's the equivalent of when you stare at the sun and a dark spot is burned into your vision. He says if you stare deeply enough into the abyss, you get this bright spot burned into your moral vision. I mean, I think there probably are moral effects. I guess partly I feel like there's an uncertainty principle problem where, like, to the degree to which one is really able to think about poems and plays as moral vehicles, I don't know how much that same frame of mind is going to be able to produce good work. And it's almost like looking at a particle as a wave or as a particle, right? Or looking at light as a wave or a particle. Like, I don't, it feels to me like so many of these conversations when we talk about what kind of art we want for the sake of improving people, it takes the passive voice, right? This will have this effect, or we want to have this. But I guess for me, the question is always, what am I going to make? How am I going to, when I sit down to write, that's how I'm confronting the art, either as a reader or as a writer.
I want to let Elijah chime in. Yep. I just want to qualify one last thing, because I agree, but again, I'll just quote Schiller here, or
please
paraphrase, where he actually has a whole essay where he attacks people that are saying art is about sort of morality. He's saying art is about giving pleasure, but entertainment technically. So he seems to be like, wait, Schiller, you're just looking to like entertain the demos finally. Like, what are you trying to say? But he's saying that the byproducts, the effects, if you can, what are you entertaining people with? And I guess that's really the question, right? What are the consequences of that entertainment? What kind of subject is portrayed? It doesn't have to have a moral intent as such, but like, what kind of subjects are you treating and how are you treating them? That has a lot of implications in terms of your sort of your paradigm of thinking, right? Your epistemology, how you interpret experience in the world. That's what ideas are. So I don't see how we can divorce the role of ideas from art, and ideas have consequences, right? Ideas
Yeah.
have moral and all sorts of other implications. But Schiller is saying, first and foremost, whatever the art's sort of moral of the story is or not, it has to be pleasurable. It has to entertain. But that's also why art can be one of the most effective ways to improve people. That was his point,
Right.
because they can also enjoy themselves. You're not banging people over the head. You're not just like screaming at people to stop sinning or they're going to hell. You can actually you can introduce interesting themes that people will want to learn about, want a movie they'll want to watch where they'll actually encounter paradoxes. I mean, if we don't, that's probably a more useful word, right? They encounter big questions. Art deals with big questions, and sometimes these questions are just not asked, right? Like, and you're
Yeah,
not
yeah,
necessarily
yeah,
going to
yeah,
run
yeah.
into them in an academic sort of course or career in the same way that you will from like a truly visceral and visionary piece of art. So Schiller is just making the point that art is unique in that way. And if you lose that, then you really do only have one choice, which is to bang people over the head and have reward and punishment. If you break the law, you're going to get in trouble. If you don't, if you tattle on your neighbor or you're a rat in your office, maybe you'll get some goodies, right? Or if you make a Faustian pact with the devil, we'll give you a lot of goodies. But it's just reward and punishment, right? And that,
Wait. Well, this is an evil society?
oh no, it's not necessarily an evil. It's just
Okay, we're incentivizing people to make a pact with the devil.
the evil society could have nice things, by the way.
Yeah, oh yeah, oh, no, for sure,
It's just
yeah.
shitty.
I just got lost a little bit there. I was like, wait a minute, what are we incentivizing again?
Okay, yeah. I mean, I feel like I have a version of this debate all the time because as soon as you say the word moral, people are like, whoa, wait a minute.
Right.
You want to hand down lessons in your art? It's like, well, hold on a second. Like part of the question, part of the problem is that there's like a semantic slipperiness about the word moral.
Mm.
And when you say moral, bells go off in people's heads saying, "Oh, you have a lesson to impart. That's what this is about." When really, it's not that. It's not the idea that art is medicine that you're wrapping sugar around and then you're delivering it to someone. It's that it's more like good food. It nourishes you. Like
Right.
it. Art has a moral dimension, is the thing.
Yeah.
Art
There
has
I'm with you. Yeah,
yeah, art has a moral dimension, and you cannot ignore it. You can't
yeah,
ignore it, and you can't separate. Like there's the problem is dualism, right? Like oh, there's pleasurable art and there's moral art, and pleasurable art is truer to what art is than moral art. It's like that's not the issue. That's not what I'm arguing. What I'm arguing is that there is art which has a real powerful effect on people, and part of that effect is pleasure, and part of that also is that you're making them engage with ideas and with situations that they have to wrestle with, that they have to think about, and that has a moral impact on the human being. And that's something that we should keep in consideration when we're making art. Not that we should be like trying to secretly smuggle lessons into the art, but that there is going to be words like you said, David. Words and ideas have consequences, and so this is something that and so it should challenge us not to say, oh, I want to cover X, Y, and Z moral point in this artwork, but to say rather, you know, as an artist, I should be aspiring to paint a really true and insightful vision of the world for people, to give people the best that I have to offer about life. Again, not in point by point form, but just like this is as true a vision as I can make, and I'm going to try to make it in as grand and beautiful a way as I can. And I think that people like Milton and Dante were thinking that way.
I think here. That's what. That's why, like Elijah, you're God bless. I mean, you're good at kind of grounding the conversations. That's why I like having you on and chatting with you guys. Just in general, that's good. I think that kind of we could go on for a while. So this is where we pose it, because that's not a bad note to end on. But do we have? Well, how do you guys feel? Again, don't.
I was going to say I have a poem that was brought to mind by the poem you read at the beginning.
Okay.
That is on I think it has a similar sentiment, but maybe is I think the way I frame, because I think I probably am not so far, Elijah, from what you're saying when I approach art, either as a reader or as a writer. What I want is to feel on the hook. I want to feel at risk. And I don't think that necessarily always results in a better moral state, but I don't want to be able to read something or write something and feel perfectly secure that I'm the good one, right? I want to feel like I'm taking my moral self in my hands. I'm having to deal with something that where the stakes are real. And this is a poem called The Oracles, which I know you like, Elijah, by A.E. Housman, which is, I think, echoes a sentiment that you find in the Juster translation of that Petrarch poem. But I think where that one, by my lights, I can agree with the argument of the poem. It doesn't make me feel something. This one feels like it raises those moral problems, but then it doesn't. It leaves us in the problem at the end, even though I think Housman probably, in large part, agrees with Petrarch. This is The Oracles by A. Housman. "'Tis mute, the word they went to hear on high Dodona mountain, when winds were in the oaken shaws, and all the cauldrons told, and mute's the midland navel stone beside the singing fountain, and echoes list to silence now where gods told lies of old. I took my question to the shrine that has not ceased from speaking, the heart within that tells the truth and tells it twice as plain. And from the cave of oracles I heard the priestess shrieking that she and I should surely die and never live again. O priestess, what you cry is clear, and sound good sense, I think it. But let the screaming echoes rest, and froth your mouth no more. 'Tis true there's better booze than brine, but he that drowns must drink it. And O my lass, the news is news that men have heard before. The king, with half the east at heel, is marched from land of mourning. Their fighters drink the rivers up, their shafts benight the air. And he that stands will die for naught, and home there's no returning. The Spartans on the sea-wet rock sat down and combed their hair." That last line, I wouldn't say it redeems the poem or it makes the poem positive or happy, but it's a moment of attention and care and beauty in the midst of despair, in the midst of darkness and loss. There's still this investment in something that has value regardless of whether anyone's going to notice it afterward.
It also, in a different way, I heard somebody once point out the purpose of the film noir is to show something that's kind of like, it seems the film noir seems very dark and morbid right halftime, but it's that actually you come out of it that, hey, life's not that bad as well. I did get that from it as well. Like, you can still take those moments regardless of the situation, and it just kind of brings you down and back down to earth, and you're not in your head, and that's kind of always useful. So for some reason I like that. I haven't read much Housman, but he's and not hysterically shrieking like the priest. He says, "Yeah, I know. I've heard that bad news, and it's okay. Just you settle down a little bit. Let's talk about something that maybe is a little more memorable." Comb your hair.
I wanted to thank you, David, for having me on in particular, because my prediction was that I really have enjoyed listening to you, and I you like Elijah are actually really learned. Um, my prediction was that it would be disastrous for you to have me on your program, that you would end up getting canceled for associating with me. So I'm grateful for your hospitality.
Oh no, I think this. We're here to have conversations. No, there's happy that you've joined, and I mean you did exactly technically what your job was, which is to raise questions and push back, and that forced me and Elijah to be like, well, hang on a second, and I'm like, well, let me have a second go at this thing and like see if we can get somewhere, right? And I think we got somewhere by the end. Guys, where can people find you if they'd like to learn more about you? You each got a podcast, and maybe just do a little shameless plug for the folks.
Sure. Well, I'm at Versecraft on both Substack and wherever you get your podcasts. If you Google Versecraft, you'll find me. It's actually very easy. But happy for people to check it out. I have episodes that are, most of the episodes are deep dives, deep readings into poems, and there's also a lot of metrical analysis that I do. There are other episodes that are about more general topics, including a lot of overlap with some of the stuff that we've discussed today. I have essays in various places. I often post about that on the and I often
we will post to that, just so we're going to link to your guys' stuff. And I mean, Elijah's written some great stuff. Your Monumentalist Manifesto, The Iron Lyre. You're a visionary man, Elijah, and so I hope that our audience gets to discover that. So we'll send them over to your Substack.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
much for having me.
I was going to say, I just recorded last night. I've not put it out yet, but I talked about how one of the things I really admire about Versecraft is that Elijah composes these arguments and essays effectively, but his delivery is such that it doesn't sound like a guy reading a paper. You will certainly learn something, and you will probably be engrossed and maybe even provoked if you listen to Versecraft. When you are tired of that and want to smoke a blunt, you can listen to Slee Ricketts, which is, I think of it as a dumb podcast for smart people. It's our tagline is it's a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. We do talk about poetry a lot, as well as plenty of other things. Elijah makes appearances not infrequently. You can just go to sleerickets.com or MathewBuckleySmith.com. It'll take you to the same place. I write things as well in various places.
Yeah, well, he just won a big award from Rattle.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Shout it. This is supposed to be a shameless plug, Matt.
Yeah. It's a chat book that if all of the aspects of my book, I have a book of poetry called Midlife, and all of the aspects of it that conservative Christians love are absent from the chat book that's coming out, which is all sex and darkness. But it's called The Soft Black Stars, and it'll be out sometime soon. And it's, hey, if nothing else, it'll sound pretty good. You can just ignore all of the messages. Sorry?
What was the title?
The Soft Black Stars. It's from a Thomas Ligotti story, which he's borrowing from a Robert Chambers story, which he's borrowing from an Ambrose Bierce story.
Fascinating. I'll have to check that out. Audience, these two learned men, thank you for joining us, guys. Do stay on right after. So we'll be back again shortly. Not a shameless plug, an announcement at this point. I mean, we're close to done the new Edgar Allan Poe film. It's now, it's probably gonna be like an hour, 45 minutes. So it's a full-length film at this point. And we do have a vision. I mean, I'm collaborating with somebody else. They're not a billionaire, but they're at least funding it so that I can just work, undisturbed. But yeah, we're going to completely change the official story about Edgar Allan Poe. And it's going to be out just in time for Halloween. So, there's a lot of big things coming, and we have a lot of films on the roster.
David, I really enjoyed The Devil at Woodstock. I totally disagree. I didn't totally. I disagreed with like 40% of it, but I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed your lecture with the slides as well. I wanted to recommend to you another person who does documentary videos that you would probably hate but maybe appreciate her craft is ContraPoints. I think she's terrific. She actually, your videos reminded me in some ways of hers. I think you two are diametrically opposed in terms of your worldviews, but you both actually have very good taste. So in an odd way, you might like her.
You'd be surprised with the people that I jam with. So I get along with. But
Good.
hey, send me some stuff. So guys, again, this was fun, and it was great to keep getting to know you guys, and hopefully we'll have some other projects down the line. I mean, again, the world is vast, and I think there's a hunger for the kinds of things that we're talking about, whether, whilst they deny it abjure, as Shelley wrote in his defense of poetry, they can't deny that power seated on the thrones of their soul. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll be back again shortly.
Thank you so much.